Welcome to the perfect place to put a practice podcast by Scott McDonald and DrDemographers.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Hello, this is Scott McDonald of Dr. Demographics. Now, as you know, we're in the business of helping you figure out where to put a practice, where to purchase a practice, and what locations are going to work best for most offices of different types. Now, we got to say that we do a lot more than we used to. We started out doing a lot of dental, but right now we're doing physicians and other kinds of healthcare practices. And we've come up with formulas that you need to consider if you're considering a location in the United States. Our job is to help you find locations and evaluate them to say which one might be relatively better than another. But we also want you to understand the sites that you're currently looking at to determine, are they going to make it? Are they reasonably priced? Now, obviously, we're in a time of economic downturn. Some people are claiming that we're in for a recession soon. If that's true, and certainly we know that inflation is rearing its head, you don't have the money that you once did to kind of throw away. So you're doing research, you're getting to know how good or bad a location might be. So our discussion is going to be based upon the new science of practice site evaluation, and we call it pinpointing. Now, pinpointing, as I'll describe in just a minute, is not exactly the same technique that people have been using for a long time. I'm not trying to suggest that people are dumb or ill-intentioned in helping doctors figure out where to go. I will, however, say that they often don't understand the science of geographic locations, nor psychographics, nor competition analysis. So I want to introduce you to the concept of pinpointing and explain how it's going to make a big difference in where you go. Once again, you just don't have the money to throw away, do you? Now, site selection is really a science, but it also involves some new technologies in analysis and really looking at the figures that people had. Now, in the old days, realtors would look at a map and they would look at a few facts and they would make a pronouncement as to what's a good or reasonable place to go. As things have gotten more difficult demographically and in price of practice, land use, and laws, it's not quite as simple a matter as it used to be. Now, few consultants, realtors, and brokers, let alone doctors, understand pinpointing in site selection. As I was saying, it's not as though they're ill-intentioned, but they don't understand very often the art and the science that's involved in looking at what a good location might be. It's time to rediscover this lost science that we refer to as pinpointing. So let me explain. What is pinpointing? Now, there is a time in which people have considered a circle radius around a site to be, well, normal. So what you do is you say, I want to look at the population within a 5, 10, maybe 15 miles around an office. And it was considered all good. That was as good as you can get. Now, we introduced the idea of drive time in determining what is a reasonable thing to look at. And this is an illustration of it. This is a 5 and a 10-minute drive time. Now, the reason it's important is because there are lots of factors that people have ignored to this point in terms of traffic, topography, demographic trends, commute times, and of course, the other factors that one would expect, like population growth and income, land values, and those are normal. What I'm saying is there is something more that you need, and we can offer it. So in this episode today, I want to talk about the art and science of pinpointing, which is a way of looking at a geographic analysis in order to get a head start on everybody else. It's to make wise decisions in a competitive market that is not cheap. Now, it involves the examination of factors from a small geographic scale. Now, the scale, how many people are living in a geographic area, how long it takes them to get there, factors that one has been ignoring for a long period of time, we want to kind of bring back into the mix so you can make good decisions. So stick with me. We're looking at non-demographic factors when it comes to pinpointing. Now, these factors include traffic patterns, proxemics, which is a term you may not know about, visibility, isochronics, another term that kind of it confuses some people, and other factors that may prove important to a practice's success. And it's going to help you understand the risks that you're taking in some locations that may not exist in others. Now, pinpointing is only possible due to modern cartographical technologies such as satellite imagery. Now, cartographic is referring to map making or map analysis. It's the combination of demographics and geographics in saying, is this site going to work for you? Now, if you look back at those maps that I was just showing you, you know that people don't travel in circle radii. Yes, it's easy for you to understand, but if there is a freeway interchange or a mountain or a body of water, a major road, you know, they ignore those things in circles, assuming, of course, that what you need is just to know everybody within a 5-mile radius. That's not true. There are factors that you need to know. So let's talk about those. Hybrid data mapping is what the term that a lot of demographers are using. It's where you're using multi-levels of analysis and data to make assumptions about the population and how it behaves. Psychographics, for example, is an analysis of how people buy things and what they value and what they want. So a practice that is a dental practice or a medical office or some kind of medical specialty is going to be fine for one type of practice, may not be good in another. This is where microcomputer technology has really helped people in their analysis of what is a good and reasonable place to go. So please stick with me. I'm trying to help you. The challenge is to understand patterns of human behavior. It's what people do that is integrated into a geographic setting. Now, you know that if you take a circle, people on the north side of that circle are going to be different than people on the south side of the circle. Pinpointing would tell you the difference between the people on the north and the south and the east and the west. Even in a 5-mile radius, the population can be determined to how it's different and how they're going to behave. Again, it's their actions, the human behavior, that is important for you to determine how to market your practice and what services to offer. Because if the population wants a service, you want to offer it. If they don't, you don't. Now, there are lots of ways that demographers look at these facts, and I'll talk about them specifically as we go through. So I'm going to ask your patience. Every profession is working from a different scale. Now, let me just ask, as you probably know, different practices have a different geographic area or radius that they're going to draw from. Sometimes what you need to know is not just the distance or the competition ratio, but rather the characteristics demographically of that population to determine, are they going to come to me? What should I offer? Now, as an example, people will tend to travel only a 7-minute drive time between their home and a general dental practice. That is not true in every case, but it's a truism that we think is worth measuring. About a 7-minute drive time. Specialists, people will travel further, and when there is a low population density, they may have to travel much further geographically and in time to get from their home or their place of work to your office. Now, other professions have a much larger scale, or by the way, a smaller scale, or geographic scope that define the practice area. So you'll say, are there enough people in the area to support my practice? You see, we're measuring your risk in that area. You might also realize that the competition analysis is not a static statistic. Some areas are going to be able to have a lot more competitors in the area, given the demographic character of that population. If they have a lot more money, or if they're in single family dwellings or in apartments. You need to know that because the number of people who live and work within an area is going to vary, and it's going to change the desirability of that site. And I really hope I haven't lost you. Now, the scale changes with different professions. And I'm going to give you the simple example as dentists versus small animal veterinarians. A patient base, the pediatric oncologist versus geriatric endocrinologist, is very different. You know that to go to a pediatric endocrinologist, you may have to travel 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, to be able to find a good pediatric oncologist. You've got a child with leukemia? Well, that is not an unreasonable distance to go. But if you are dealing with general practices like a veterinarian or small animal practice, you'll tend not to travel that far. Now, these are factors that you probably already know by your gut instincts, but at Dr. Demographics, we can actually tell you, is there sufficient population, and how big is that population? Do we have enough people in that patient base to work and keep our practice busy all the time? Can we add another doctor to our practice and in what we're trying to offer? That's the point. Now, there is a thing we refer to as urgency. There are some kinds of treatment that are much more urgent than others. By the way, that's why urgent care is what it is. Urgent care, as you know, they have extended hours most often, and it is their hours of operation that are most important. So therefore, the urgency of care and the distribution of competition, et cetera, will influence the scale with other factors in mind. And now, in many cases, the number of providers makes the distances that patients must travel, well, quite large and can be reasonably small. When it comes to the geographic area that practices serve, the size varies with the practice type. So what you're trying to do is say, I'm not using a measurement for veterinarians and dentists if I'm not working in that, if I'm working in an urgent care clinic. Those things are going to make it better or worse for your practice. And that's the whole point. We can analyze it to tell you, is it going to work for you? Now, if a big percentage of patients and potential patients come from nearby, well, that's great. But if they don't, you've got to know how far away people are and something about their consumer patterns. Now, as you probably know, discount coupons are very popular in some areas. Sometimes they're the kiss of death. But you see, what makes them what they are is something about the population and its character. Retirement communities draw from a common age group, obviously. So you're going to have people who are 55 years to 65 years of age to come there. Do they want to travel by public transportation? Retirement community residents do not. They'll usually come by private vehicle. Their ethnicity matters as well as their housing type. Are they coming from a rental unit? Are they coming from a home? Are they renting or buying that? You see, these things are going to determine the viability of your site, and we can help you figure out if that's going to work for you. Now, these people will use the same roads and frequent the same restaurants and shop at the same stores as other people in their demographic group. So, if you got a lot of retirees in an area, if you have a lot of young families in an area, those young families and those retirees are going to have things in common. To make a practice viable, you have to understand the commonality of the patient base. I hope that makes sense. At Dr. Demographics, we can tell you who you're trying to reach and how to reach them. That's what a marketing report does. So the where and the how that these people travel, for example, mean that they have the same traffic patterns as other people in their demographic group. But if they're in a different demographic, they're not. So you can't just take the flat idea that everybody is the same within an area. You got to find the people who have those things in common. That's where the art and science of demographics really pays off, to determine how much risk you have in a site, but also how to promote the practice in that site to have the best return on your investment. Now, the amount of traffic passing by a practice site can determine the success of the practice, but the number of commuters and the time of day of their travel is very important. Just because a lot of people live by a site or work by a site doesn't mean that the commute patterns are going to be beneficial to you. In other words, people today have to be measured on the move. Where do they shop? Where do they work? How do they get there? That's what a demographic report really should be telling you, but very rarely does unless you have somebody who understands your industry to know how people are going to get there and what they're going to want once they arrive at your office. At Dr. Demographics, we provide or can provide traffic maps and tables to tell you where they are, what they come from, and their demographic characteristics in motion. You ought to know that. Now let's talk about this term proxemics, because this is very rarely discussed, but something is important. Literally, proxemics. It refers to how close one place is to another. What's nearby? And what are the people like who work and live in that area that is nearby your office? In healthcare, how close the practice might be to an attraction like a medical center or a hospital matters. Again, this is an issue of pinpointing the office. If the practice regularly sends a patient to have blood drawn or x-rays taken, a radiologist, the proximity of your practice to these vendors, labs, and diagnostic centers can be a boon to the practice. But if they're not, you need to know that. And part of what we do in our analysis is to say, you need to know these people who are going to be the referral base to your office, and will those people be clustered in order to make your practice viable? One can assume that a place with population clusters could really matter. As an example, those who work with people who travel to the practice from a place of work will be different from those who travel from a residence. How far an office is from the source of patients is not really a matter of demographics as much as it is a source of the population. So the relationship between the people who live and work near a site, near your office or potential office, matters. You got to know who's there and how to attract them. Demographics or Dr. Demographics can provide competition ratios and databases and population provider ratios. Did you know that we can tell you what the major employers are near a site, not just who lives there? Now, look, most demographics you get are going to be about their residents. I'm just going to tell you that's a fact. But you also need to know about how the practice site will relate to where people work, the time of day that they're commuting to and from their offices and their place of work, and really if it's going to have an impact upon the success of your office. Again, that's what a good demographer can do. Now, I also want to talk about the concept of visibility. Visibility is not measured in demographics. Here's what I mean. It used to be back in the 1970s and 80s that if you were close to a big population center and everybody knew where it was, like Chinatown or a major university or a landmark like the World Trade Center, or the Empire State Building, or 450 Sutter. It was a major asset. But that trend has declined as security, parking, and expense has become liabilities. You see, you don't need to have a visible office like you used to. Because remember, the Thomas Guide used to be ubiquitous. Everybody had a copy of it in their back seat. But just because you knew how to get there didn't mean that it was really practical for people to do so. However, cell phone computer tracking really helps people figure out how to get to a site. Visibility, therefore, which helped people figure out how to get to your office, was really important. Not so much anymore. And in fact, landmark locations have become a liability. They increase traffic and definitely make the site more expensive for you to practice in. Now, for this reason, visibility does not have the cachet it once enjoyed. Accessibility, defined by drive time, supplanted these locations. Now, Arco Plaza in Los Angeles had a large number of offices at one time. Major streets like Wilshire and Santa Monica Boulevard were all important. Broadway, well, I won't go through all the streets in the big cities, but they aren't quite as important as they used to be. And in fact, they can be harmful. Dr. Demographics can provide street-level views of almost every site in the United States. Now, visibility is important if you're trying to figure out, is the new office we're going to have reasonable signage? Now, signage is important to figuring out where to put the practice. Did you know that we can do a visibility report and tell you if it's going to work for you or if it's not? Now, psychographics. In previous episodes, we've discussed the 65 plus psychographic lifestyle categories. Now, among other things, they parse the population into smaller and well-defined population groups that take into account consumer preferences. So we can tell you if an area is going to be a good place based on its psychographics. What are those people going to want in terms of advertising, offers, services in your office? And it's determined by their lifestyles, their purchase decisions. They can be identified by geographic areas. I can tell you who the dominant groups are in a location, and that's very helpful. But it's not typically going to tell you who the exclusive groups are in a location. We can just tell you which ones are going to be better. And this is where pinpointing really comes into psychographics. But this market segmentation tool, and by that tool, it tells us the type of practice that would fit better in a particular neighborhood or another. Now, this is demographics on steroids. It's really a big deal and a helpful technology, but very few realtors and brokers know about psychographics. We can help you and we can help them to figure the kind of practice that might do best in a particular type of practice site. Therefore, a dental implant practice could identify what types of consumer would tend to be edentulous or older or younger, richer, poorer, in terms of wanting a service that you offer. Dr. Demographics can run a psychographic study on any location in the US, providing the lifestyle and psychographic view of every neighborhood in the United States. Now, I want to talk to you for a second about covenant areas, because it's not a true demographic. It's a factor regarding geographics. And if you want to see what a covenant area might be, if it's reasonable in size, too big or too small, you really need to know that. And only a demographer can help you with that. Dr. Demographics can provide demographic descriptions, maps, prose definitions, and imagery so there won't be any mistakes. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people get to court and they're trying to defend a covenant area or a covenant not to compete. The courts often throw these things out when challenged because they're not providing a rational explanation for why they're coming up with these boundaries. Our experience can help avoid pitfalls, mistakes, and misunderstandings that can cost you a lot of money later. We can help your transition remain stress-free as possible. So look, if you're going to have an area, a transition, have us look at your covenant area and work on that. It's a very inexpensive process now, but if you're trying to defend it, it can be a nightmare later. Now, pinpoint services include competition analysis, traffic maps and data, neighboring businesses, and employer databases. Like I was saying, we can tell you how many people work at a particular business and how stable they are, how much money the business makes, and if the employees in that business are going to be helpful to your practice. We can also talk about visibility and signage data, psychographic reports, as we do in the marketing report. All of this is intended to do one thing. We're trying to provide you enough information that you can make a decision on the viability of the practice, but also how to promote the practice so that you can make a good living at it. Now, the marketing report's only about $700. You can learn more about it at drdemographics.com. And if you want to talk about any of our products and services, call us at 800-849-0499. Mike Green is brilliant at this. I'm telling you, he's brilliant. I've taught him everything he knows, but hey, he's brilliant. All right, I'm just kidding. The guy is a real great boots on the ground demographer. He understands how the numbers apply to reality. If we can help you to succeed, please give us a call. We look forward to helping you in the future. Our prices are listed on the website in the drop-down menus. And thanks so much for watching.